Everybody, this is Brian Huff, and for the Built with Amplify, Built with AppSync AWS Hackathon, I wanted to create a Pomodoro type application. So productivity has been something that I've been thinking a lot about this year and sort of thinking about how do I best accomplish projects and how do I just increase my flow state and just being overall more efficient. So I was looking at Pomodoro as a strategy and I was thinking, maybe I could try to build this as a project and then I can use this for myself or share it with other people. So that's what I built. And I did not know that there was going to be a lot of data structure and algorithm type um just concepts that would come up specifically with data streams and stacking and restacking elements in your Pomodoro stream. So that's something that I'm just going to take a few moments and talk about and share. And I'll sort of go through the overall process of how I went about solving those problems. And then I'll give you a demo of the application. Then you can see actually how I built it. But let me share my screen. And then you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Okay. So this was my application and just a little bit about how I started it. So I wanted to start, pretty simple. It just was going to show a timer and some sort of refresh button and then a play button and then just a list of tasks. And I thought that, I had created, to-do list type applications before. So I figured, oh, this could probably be, not necessarily too difficult to tackle for a hackathon. And then there became a lot of, questions about the actual stack and the elements in the array and how do you map those when items change. But before we get into that, just going through a little bit of the tech stack. So I'm a little bit opinionated about AWS stack that I really like, just in terms of building with AWS, but I like using Next.js, TypeScript, style components, and then Material UI for React library components. And then, of course, using AppSync with GraphQL for the API, DynamoDB for the database, Amplify hosting for managed hosting and deployments with CI/CD from GitHub, storage with S3, and then Cognito for authentication. So this was how I built the stack. So getting into how the numeric sort query works with GraphQL with NoSQL DynamoDB data. So the question that I wanted to address was, you have a list of items, you have, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pretty simple. But let's say that we move the item number 3, which is 0, 1, 2. So index 2, we want to move that to index 0. So it becomes the first item in the order, and then everything goes down. So you'll see that this, kind of stacks differently. So what I needed to understand was when you're changing the order of this, you're not changing the ID, you're just changing the position, but then how do you actually query for that positioning? So I started getting a little bit more detailed of how this would work in Dynamo. So, you have your 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have your order. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And that was pretty simple just to start off with. But then let's say that we move, again, that third object, that second index into the index 0, so the first position. Well, now this has a different order. This has a different order. This has a different order. So how do you adjust for that stacking? And especially if you start dragging and dropping and moving things around, how would you actually account for the restacking and the manipulation of that data structure? So I sort of went down the rabbit hole of using global secondary indexes and then thinking about how could I create queries based upon a sort direction around the elements in the database. So it turns out that that is something that you can do. So what I did was, for all the items in the schema, you have your order, and that's going to be a number. So again, that's the order here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So each one will be assigned, a number. But then you can have an order list, which is a string. you pass in a current value that you want to query for. So for the items that you would find relevant, you could just have current or live or, available or ready. But it would just be one, and I make sure that the default is always this. So this is a great extension of AppSync where you can have default values, so you don't actually have to write this in every time. It'll just auto-generate when the element is created, which is awesome. And then I created this list order items by user ID. So what was interesting about this was this took me a little bit of time to figure out, but I found that I can pass in current, and I'll show you below. So what I can do is when I want to list them, I just pass in current. It's going to find all of the elements that say current. But then when I apply a sort direction, that's ascending order. Well, now I can get access to all the items that are in that order. And what's interesting about that too is when we have this sort key fields with the order, so now it's going to say, okay, given all of the items that are current, we want to rank them or list them out numerically by the order, which is a number. So I thought that was a very interesting way to go about the numeric sorting of your DynamoDB data. So that's where then I was able to map this data structure, and then how I actually do the updates, which I'll show you. So there is an interesting method that you can use, which is an iterable interoperator, iterable iterator. That's what it is. So it takes in an index and an element, and those are items that are together. And what you can do is through a for of loop, you can iterate through all the different elements that basically change. And then you use this dot entries method with tuple destructuring to then assign the new values to the base structure of that iterable iterator element. So that was my solution for tackling this component of it. And then what you'll do is that you'll be able to take this item that's changing, and then the order, you'll have the index, you'll add, +1, and then you'll await a call to Amplify API, which is going to AppSync, and then do GraphQL transformation, which is GraphQL operation, update this item with the individual input. So this is how you're doing the for each item. And then you could just get an error in a try catch if it doesn't work out. And if you are using TypeScript, just some things to note that this iterable iterator is it's only in ES6. So you have to make sure that you use that when you define your target, or you can use this down level iteration and then just make that compiler flag equal to true. This is the one that I did, but either one would work in this sense. And yeah, just some considerations about hard typing GraphQL with TypeScript. I think that TypeScript is really helpful to understand for your project when you're making, rigid structures to work from. Also helping you really understand your data model and how it actually works. I found that I was making certain assumptions about the data, and using TypeScript actually helped me understand if I really understood them or not, and then made sure that I did. And again, really important, because if you're pushing code to production, you need to make sure that it's bug-free, error-free, not going to have any issues run up. Something that I thought also was interesting during this hackathon, I was learning about type guards, and I'm just getting more familiar with how you use these. So when you make queries in AppSync, so you'll create, your interface, which is going to be basically the same schema as your GraphQL, and then you'll create a type guard, which is a function, and that will basically be looking for this GraphQL result, which is you can import this from Amplify core, the package AWS Amplify core, and then you'll be able to just check to see if you're returning, something.data or something.data.something or something.data.something.items. So just different ways that you can make sure that the response that you get from AppSync is exactly what you're expecting. And then in terms of the actual function, so let's say that we're trying to get items from the database. So if you remember from before, when we had that order list with the list order items by user ID, so that global secondary index where we're numerically sorting based upon that string. So we find all the items. We're going to do sort direction, which is, ascending. We'll do filter, and then the status equals to running. And this is just, I'll show you how I break this down, but I break the pool into two separate groups. And then that's how I'm able to filter for each user. And then we have our type guards here. And then we're able to export this out as items. And then we set those items in an array that we can then pull from. And this is, the DynamoDB data coming from that. So just to also give a little bit of perspective. So I was using Amplify with AppSync for the AWS backend. So, our API with GraphQL, we use Cognito for authentication. Lambda is running a few things in the background for us with our DynamoDB database. And then we're using S3 for some elements in the application. So just to give you an example of the test, so this is on the production branch that I have. So what I wanted to be able to do was create. So this is, initialize, your project, initialize Amplify, add an API, deploy, and then share with friends. I just figured that those could be 5 steps that might, work for this type of project. So then as you go from item 1, this is going to then, deplete, and then it's going to go to the next one, and then that one's going to deplete, and then that's going to deplete. You could also, maybe delete these if you want to, or immediately, start a specific one there, and then it's going to start, moving around the circle. So this was just to get a little bit of my bearings around also drag and drop and how this works. So this was just for testing purposes. So that was just helpful for that. So I will give you an example of 2 specific logged in users. So this is, I just have one on localhost and then one on the production branch. So this is test 1. So when you are already logged in, go to the app. It's going to load your individual posts. So this person, which is me, has 6 items that are already created here. And then when I go to this one doesn't have any items in their stack. So just 2 of my accounts. I wanted to show you like one that has stuff and then one that doesn't. So when we want to create an item, so you can just hover over here. We'll do add a task. We'll say start the demo. For this one, we'll just say a minute. You could have different ones, but just for sake of demo, I'm just going to do this. Let's say ship the next version of the app, and then I'll just say ship the next version. We'll do add. Let's do create a feature flag, app config, add. Let's say update GraphQL schema. And then recreate CI/CD pipeline, like that orange. And I'll just make another one that's blue. And then we'll do write a blog post. So you can already start to see that these items are spanning down there. So these are all created. So I created also a method just to refresh the database and make sure that you could have a reset way. This becomes really helpful also because when you start dragging and dropping, this was that tuple destructuring element that I was showing you earlier. That becomes really important here because when I move this to the first order, I move this to the second one, I move this to the third one, now I move it here, now I move it here. So when I refresh this, it's still updating in the same stack. So this is really interesting because, and you can actually see that this is all going to, validate as the same, because when we do this here, we move these around, we do that. So now these are in different positions. And if I refresh the screen, you Now you see that these are there. Let's say that I'm going to move this to the top and I'm going to do a refresh. So the red one should still be at the top when I log back in, which it is. And that's true because when you go down here, you go to the order. So the order is 1, order is 2, order is 3. So can also delete these items if you want. And then where I think the fun part is that when we immediately start, it's going to know that this is the first one that is in the chain. And then when we want to just continue going through the stack, it's going to then go through this one, and then it's going to go to the next one, and then it's going to go to the next one after that. So I also added a sound to it just to make it a little bit more fun when you complete tasks. So hopefully you heard that. In case Zoom is allowing screen sharing with audio. So you'll see here that now this item is there. So if you actually see, this is where I'm creating a separate list. So these are two separate queries happening right now. One is all of the items that are basically ready, and then the items that are completed. And this is going to fire off another one. So now these will have a status for completed, and these are the ones that have a status as running. So that's how I'm able to then filter down the data into two different groups. And then this is happening really fast, and this is actually not happening through a WebSocket. This is just queries and then running that when certain events happen. So basically, I think that this is a really efficient way to just kind of a fun sound. So as items change, you just run that query. I have several use effect hooks that are programmed to run at basically at different situations that could come up in the application. But you'll see here that now this is filling in this stack, and then this is leaving. This is like the last one in there, and then when this is finished, it won't run anymore. So it'll say you need to add a task first to actually run, and then it's going to signal you to add some tasks. So these will stay in this stack, and we can refresh this page, and these are still there, but we can also delete them if we wanted to, and those are all updating there. And the same thing here. So just to show you that these are two different users, they have two different sets of data. I'll also refresh. These are all very different, and we can all do the same thing. I'm not going to make us wait for 10 minutes for this to go through, but you'll see here also something that I think is kind of fun. When you change the stack, it will also change the color. So you'll see here that like the color is blue for each active element. If we refresh this here, we start this, you'll see here that this is red. So just like some fun ways to bring color and life to the code. One thing that I think is actually really exciting, when every item is created in the database, I have two different Lambda scripts that are Lambda triggers that are running. So when you run your, basically whenever you generate a task through this pop-up and then you create, it adds +1 to the global set of all the tasks generated. So I have a separate DynamoDB table for public data, and it just increments this value +1. And then every time that a task is completed, this is another data field, and then that will increment by +1. So just a couple ways that Lambda can work with Dynamo so that as items happen or things are modified or changed, such as when I brought those in this other account, when these became status as completed, that then was a modification to a DynamoDB element. So then I have this Lambda trigger running to then update this other table that a task was completed. So this is a good way that you could have those types of incrementers as events happen in your application. And can also, again, we could say, share and go live. So as you add these, right, it's pretty interactive. And then if you were to delete it, it'll encourage you to make your first task. So, and of course, making tasks, this is Tasky. That's the app that I named it. So I hope that this was helpful to really go through how I built this application, the considerations that I made for what I was building, and also the learnings that I made along the way. I thought this was a really interesting type of data and API type project. So obviously it made a lot of sense to use something like AppSync and DynamoDB and Amplify to wrap the whole project together to then deploy to AWS. So hope that you enjoyed this presentation and my application, and I hope that you maybe sign up and check it out and use it yourself. All right. Thanks for taking time to listen to this, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.